There's always a better way to do what you're doing right now. So be grateful. Now they're just like, oh my gosh, there's so much more to do, right? And I was like, no, programmatic is where my heart is. Amen. Welcome to another episode of the Programmatic Digest podcast. We have a special guest. I know I say that for every episode, but I promise this one is also a special guest. She is the Chief Revenue Officer of Start.io, Ravit Ross. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, we actually had a lot of scheduling issues, but not on your
end.
Tell me, literally, we just overcame Wi-Fi. But we're going to make this happen. The next 20 minutes is going to be packed with a lot of mobile specific, like audience segmentation, mobile technology, mobile targeting technologies. So I'm really, really excited about today's conversation. But before we get into that, how about you refresh everyone's memories, maybe introduce yourself to those who don't know you yet in your own words. Who is Ravit? What do you do in your fun times? How did you get to where you are today? All of the good stuff.
Yes. So I'm Ravit. I'm based in Israel. I'm currently the Chief Revenue Officer at Start.io. We're a mobile marketing and audience platform. One of the cool things that I think little people know of us is the fact that we exist in over 500,000 apps. So our SDK monetizes like a huge amount. Yeah, I know it's huge. We mostly monetize independent developers. I know it's like my CMO was like, don't say like we're the the less known monetization company out there. It was like, but yeah, it's a good tagline, I use it. So I currently oversee the account management and sales team here at Start.io. It is 100% global. Fun fact, I used to live in Germany. Nice. For 5 years for work, yes. And I got started in mobile. Like my background comes from, like the direct response type of business, like mobile campaigns, user acquisition. Yeah. So I've been in the industry for about, I want to say 9 years. So got started off like, from as an ad ops, account manager, QA, business development, sales, like everything. At a startup, that's where I, learned everything I know. Relatively newer to the programmatic space. I think about 5 years it's been for specifically programmatic. But I'm a very curious person. I like reading a lot and asking a lot of questions. So that's me. So you didn't particularly start in programmatic. You started in mobile. Exactly. Yeah. So I started in mobile. It was a very different industry back then, where everyone like, yeah, get me cheap installs. I want to get like everything for $1 CPI. I'm like, yeah, sure. Yes. It's all about managing expectations. And yeah, it was things quickly evolved. I worked with, big names, big brands back in the day. I still do, but completely different, completely different focus back then. It evolved. It's very interesting. I always like to say that the industry, or like the mobile specific industry where I grew up in, has like the apocalypse happen every 4 years. It's sort of like it is an apocalypse. You think like, okay, so getting cheap install is great. That's not the case. And then, the fraud bubble erupted a few years ago, and that changed things quite dramatically. And I think now we're on the verge of like the next apocalypse, all things privacy, which, doesn't only involve mobile, it's everything.
Yeah. So. Oh my gosh, that's such a great segue into what we're going to talk about today. The whole world, the landscape of programmatic, like the media. Programmatic mobile media specifically. I remember like maybe 7 years ago or maybe 5 years ago when mobile became really sexy to advertiser because of the reach. It was literally like you can get all these impressions and clicks on mobile. And then as you said, I feel like a couple years after, we went through this whole like mobile clicks are trash. Do not bid on in-app and mobile. And now I think we're done much better in terms of especially measurement. So let's break it down a little bit for our folks that are maybe starting in the industry or even need a refresher like myself. Like
Mhm.
how would you define, how would you define what you do to like a 5-year-old? Let's start there.
I love that. There's like a YouTube series, right? Explains to a 5-year-old, your grandmother, like a rocket scientist. Yeah, so I love that. So what we do in a nutshell, right? Because I always give the example of like my in-laws, trying to explain to them what I do,
Oh
and then
yeah,
they think I work
sure,
for like an
yes.
intelligence company. What we do at Start.io, so we monetize apps, right? So if you think about it, apps have, let's simplify it, like say 3 ways of generating revenue for the developer. First one is subscriptions, right? Is growing more and more, and we see it. The second one is charging money for the app itself. So you download, you pay for the app, you don't see any ads, hopefully. And then the third one, which is the use case that's more applicable to us, are freemium apps. So you download the app, you don't pay for it. It could be any game or any type of transportation or CPG app or whatever. And then that app developer generates revenue from ads that are run on the app.
Oh, got
Could
it.
be anything. It could be banner, it could be display, it could be native. There's so many different ways of generating revenue. And then of course there's the way of in-app currency, right? You pay for coins or some sort of transactions in the app, but the usage in the app itself would be free. So the company was founded in 12 years ago. We just celebrated our 12th anniversary on December 12th,
Oh,
which is cool.
happy anniversary.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. The bread and butter of the company has been the SDK. So SDK is a piece of code that's embedded within the code of the app itself, and its sole purpose is for monetizing. So we exist in the app for the sake of showing ads. So we support so many different types of ads. It depends on the user journey of the app itself. Like the seamless, the better for the user. We don't want to piss anyone off. And then about 5 years ago, we realized, okay, we're getting so much of this information through the SDK integration. Everything is anonymized, right? Everything, we don't know the name, we don't know phone numbers, nothing that's PII, but that we can see, okay, so this user interacts with this ad, and then we can segment users based on their behavior. Everything is, opt out if everything is GDPR, CCPA, et cetera, compliant. But we can say, okay, we want to target this segment of users, and that segmentation is then used on advertising campaigns, right? So think about it as like a growth flywheel. We're in the app to monetize. We show ads, though those ads are powered by audiences, which are made based, which is important to mention. And then, the more advertising, the more apps we have, and then the wheel goes on and on.
Got it. Let me ask you a
At the
quick,
end of the day,
what is made? What's made based? I don't know if I understand that. What did you mean?
mobile advertising ID.
Okay, gotcha.
Advertising ID. It's like it's the cookie equivalent in mobile.
Got it. Okay, got it. Okay. Okay. Got it. So,
Yeah.
okay. So,
Yeah, people call it different names. Yeah.
gotcha. I was gonna say, is there referred as something else, but made, I think I've heard made before, so it makes sense. It makes sense to me. So,
Could
okay.
be ADID is another
Oh,
name.
okay.
There's advertising ID.
Got it. Got it.
They all stay the same.
Got it. But Mates, this is not affected by the Google cookie deprecation issue, right?
That's a really good question. So in a way it is. So what Google is doing, so this whole privacy sandbox thing started from the deprecation of the cookie, right? The decision was made, like we can't tie personal information back into cookies. We need to find a different way of targeting. But then what happened, it was kind of like it was very quiet, and it only affected the mobile industry. But what Google is doing is they're planning on deprecating the advertising idea as well,
Yes.
similar to what Apple did with the ATT iOS 14 and so on. What Apple is doing is essentially the default is opt out, meaning that your IDFA, which is the equivalent of made in iOS is
Okay.
not collected, and then you get all these pops. I don't know. I'm like an Apple fangirl, so I get all these notifications. But for the ones that don't have an iPhone, you get all these pop-ups from apps. Like, do you consent to have like, do you allow your ID to be tracked across apps?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
this is like the type of message that you get.
Mhm.
But if you do opt in, then it means that your ideas can be collected and then tied back between apps. So not
Mhm.
just app specific, but they can track your behavior for advertising purposes, of course, to show you ads that are relevant. What Google is planning is eradicating the made altogether.
Mm.
So we now we're in the process of developing a brand new SDK. So
Mhm.
Fledge, topics, all of those things that are applicable for cookies are now also applicable for the advertising ID in mobile. And this is a very lengthy process. So Google is now releasing, I think it's Android version 13, which is now officially out of beta. And this is a gradual process that will take a few years, but the end goal is to have a completely different environment for app monetization, SDKs specifically.
So I think there's two follow-up questions here, and if you hear my dog, oh wow, it's this time of the year where FedEx is in front of the door there. Even though this is gonna air in January. My question, he totally just oh, this is I think a good segue into the privacy conversation, right? Before we get into targeting and measurement in mobile. I just I just want you to really break it down for us. Like talk to us like we were, I don't know, like we were not in this industry, because sometimes it gets very confusing, even for somebody as professional expert as myself. So I know that there's a slight difference between the whole privacy concern when we refer to GDPR, when we refer to CCPA, whatever. There's a different level when it comes to mobile. So can you just refresh our memory about why this even exists, and then what we should understand with the privacy, like where we stand with privacy, especially when it comes to mobile?
For me, the biggest difference between web and mobile is, well, when you think about it this way, there's not that many differences, right? The only big difference is that your phone is with you 24/7, and the phone consists of both like a web and app environment, because you browse on your web, even on your phone.
Mhm.
The difference is tying all the pieces together. With mobile, you have, to my opinion, a more comprehensive graph of a user because it consists of multiple touch points. For
Got it.
example, some apps collect location,
Mhm.
and we know that that information was misused for, in certain situations, which is extremely unfortunate. Like I remember I was at ProGio. It was this year. A lady from the FTC was speaking, if I'm remembering this correctly,
Yeah.
and she was like, "Think about your practices, and like, do you feel comfortable as a user of having this data collected and used against you? Think about your practices." And I can proudly say that I'm very confident of our practices and the
Mhm.
fact that nothing we do is tied into a PII, right? Nothing we do is tied into something that can theoretically put someone in danger, or give out information that isn't can be used against someone. That is something that it's those things exist out there, but that is the big difference between web and mobile. I think the fact that there's additional touch points that exist on mobile, because think about ourselves as users. We go on apps, we go on the web, we speak. There are apps that are on our phones that have access to pretty much everything that we have. And that's not something that is really exists to that extent on web, specifically desktop.
Got it. Like location-based.
And
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, location can be collected when you're on web, but it's even more granular when it comes to mobile, because you're on the move. You're literally on the move.
Hi, did you know that at Ellen Parker Consulting, we now offer an accelerator program where we attract, recruit, and train future marketers. And their training includes a 6 weeks program where they cover programmatic landscape, important industry trends, the differences between targeting placement and targeting mix, and their best practices, including optimization and reporting hacks. And they're able to set up, manage, and monitor a campaign, a demo campaign in the trade desk, everything including audience selection, inventory optimization, SPO, creative upload, brand safety, you name it. They're able to do it at the end of the 6 weeks program. So if you are part of the 90% of employers struggling to find a skilled candidate today and not willing to spend $14,900 on a bad hire, according to Zippia, give us a call. Let's discuss which one of our 5 to 10 juniors available every month is the perfect fit for your team. Clients who have hired our juniors have shared that we were able to help them save 1 to 2 months onboarding with those juniors. Give us a
So now how do we, from an advertiser perspective, from a trader perspective, somebody working in a campaign, how do we ask that question, right? How do we know if, well, now we know because we listened to the Programmatic Digest podcast and we know that start.io is thebond.com. But for like in the instances where you're working with other mobile partners, other SSPs, how do we make sure that we only support those that have privacy regulations or have like, you know, like they know that they're making effort? What would be maybe like or professional recommendation for those people?
So I would give out the best piece of advice that I always give out, which is ask questions. You know, ask where the data is coming from. I can see for us what we provide is first party data because it's us on the device and it is a direct handshake between us and the user. So that's the number one question, like where is that data coming from? And the second is try to understand like first of all, as a trader, as a buyer, what is your goal? Are you looking to target like run of network? Are you looking to target a specific audience? You know, utilizing audiences that are, you know, ethically sourced is the right approach in this case, because first of all, you know that you're reaching your right audience and nobody likes to spend budgets that are not ROI positive for them. And this is, as we all know, a pain point for a lot of buyers out there and traders. You want to make sure that you're reaching the right audience and you want to know that, okay, where is this data coming from? Those are like the 2 leading questions that, in my opinion, should be leading the conversation.
Okay, yeah. So I like that answer a lot because somebody in the community that we run asked that question, like what's the best way for me to decide which data provider, which is whether it's mobile focus or not, which data provider to go for, by like how do we know which one is the best? And so I give them that answer that you know you're going to have to reach out to each individual each data provider, ask them that question. I want to ask you because I've had instances where even as a trader I've reached out to the data provider company and I got a lot of fluff back. So what would you recommend us to do in this case? Should we run, never look back, don't work with those people? Or should we push the envelope and maybe really ask? Because what I mean by fluff is that we have proprietary technology that is consent driven. Okay, but how did you get this segment? Like, what is that? How did you know that it was mom, soccer mom?
Yeah. So you should be asking this question. I mean, first of all, don't necessarily run, right? Because you don't know who you're asking this question and if they have access to this information, because they might not, and they're giving you the answer that they were given to provide to, you know, such questions. So I would ask and maybe ask to talk to someone from the product team or from the data science team, because there is a methodology behind this. You know, where is this data sourcing from? Are you working with first party? Is it third party? You could get the answer and say, okay, this is third party, which is good, and then you're getting a testament from another peer or colleague or a case study that this client, this provider is giving you, and that can give you a good enough answer, right? Sometimes you won't know until you try, but there is always a methodology behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing is just use Google. right? Look up this company
Yeah.
and see what consists of this data.
Mhm.
Where is it coming from? Do they have their own SDK? Are they, owning or operating their own websites?
Mhm.
It has to come from somewhere.
Okay, that's a great, I love that answer. Okay, so here's the last question before we move into the closing segments. What would be, okay, so I've had a lot of people saying, oh, we don't use in-app inventory or mobile inventory because we have limitation with measurement. How would you address
Mhm.
that?
That's a really good question. So measurement, I think that, we spoke about the apocalypse, right? That was happening in mobile. I think one of the good things and one of the things that it's not really happening right now with CTV, for example,
Mhm.
it's a very similar evolution to what mobile had, I think, 5 years ago. You have a few different companies that are the leading mobile measurement partners out there, very big, and they're the ones responsible for grading our homework. They're the ones there as uninterested parties to make sure that the click and the impression are indeed where they're coming from. Even if it's run programmatically, even if it's run as like a managed service, there is someone at the end of the chain that's responsible for the measurement piece. Now, if you're running an app install campaign, then you would be using one of these numbers, which are very big. And there's not that many of them. But I think what you're really asking is what happens if I'm running like a web to app campaign? How does the measurement work in that sense? So a pixel is one answer,
Okay.
which can give a close to good indication. But I think that at the end of the day, it's maybe combining a few different methods of measurement. Pixel is one, and then maybe a tag, something that's in between you and the supply, to make sure that what you're seeing and what the supplier is seeing and what the trader is seeing is all the same. There is always room for error because it's computers at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It's never 100% accurate. But it's not as complicated as it used to be.
Got it. That's a great answer. So if we had to recap our conversation, what would 3 actionable insight be? Like what would Ravit told us to do these 3 things when it comes to mobile advertising or mobile campaigns?
Yes. So number one is run campaigns with really accurate targeting to ensure that you're not wasting your budget on some audience that doesn't make sense. So that's one big takeaway. I think in terms of like the landscape and where it's changing and where it's going at, always look at alternatives, even if you see one identifier versus the other. Be a bit more critical about what's behind it, because what we're basing off now might not exist in a year. So plan way ahead. And the third one is always ask questions.
I love that. That's like the best way to end this interview because you have no idea how many times I've had somebody said you gotta ask the question, you gotta ask the question. But like to whoever's listening, you might be thinking like, oh, well, that's a given, but actually it isn't. When you're in a conference room full of different leadership title, it can be, even for somebody that had leadership role, it can be overwhelming. It can be very intimidating, but you have to step up and have the courage to ask the question that's going to turn everybody's brain a little bit more, or it's going to give everyone a different perspective. Like your role is very, 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 very important. Okay, because you're managing, you're nurturing that client's role by optimizing this campaign. And so by asking the question, you're letting them know like you have some certain level of authority and you do want to do a good job. You want to understand. So I'd love, 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 love asking question piece. Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
let's move into the closing segment. I know you said one fun fact about living in Germany, but give us another fun fact. What would be something that nobody knows about Ravit?
I speak 3 languages,
Oh, cool.
which is not, it's not that fun of a fact, but yeah, I speak
really
3
cool.
languages.
It's really cool. Which one are they?
Yeah. So Hebrew,
Okay.
well, yeah, English and Romanian.
Oh, that is really cool. That is very, very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
I
So that's,
you don't hear this combination very often.
No, it's a unique one. Yeah. So my parents immigrated from Romania to
Mhm.
Israel.
Got it.
They didn't even know any Hebrew, so that's the Romanian part.
Yeah.
And then they were traveling so much, I had a nanny that spoke nothing but English to me. So that's the English part. So I only spoke Hebrew when I went to school. Like I was,
Yes.
I think, 4 years old.
Got it, got it. Oh, wow, that's
So
really cool. That is very,
good.
very cool. And it's very reassuring because my first language is French, so I'm only speaking French to my toddler, and my husband is only speaking English. But we also have two other dialects that we speak. One is Creole Cape Verdean, so it sounds Portuguese, and one is in the country that I grew up, Senegal. They speak like the most spoken one, because there's many, is Wolof, and that sounds a little bit Arabic. I mean, yeah, Arabic and African. So I'm always like, eventually we'll get to the other two language. Let's lock in on those two first. But she understands everything I say, so it's very reassuring that you can teach more than two languages.
Definitely. Yeah. So I studied linguistics in university.
Mhm.
So I know a bit about this. So kids, I think up to the age of 5 are like a sponge. So
Yeah,
whatever language you speak to them, they might pick it up later, but once they start, they'll never go back. So they like acquire the language, which is very cool.
wow.
So keep
All
it
right.
up. You're
Well,
doing a
I'm
good
gonna
job.
need
Yeah.
to pick up the other two in the next 2.5 years, at least.
No rush.
No rush, no rush. There's only two additional
No rush.
languages, so it's okay. Well, Lavik, thank you so much for dropping by. We really appreciate you. Actually, her and I met at Programmatic IO in Las Vegas this year, so shout out to the Ad Exchanger for putting us into contact. Actually, we met at the Weatherbug party, right? Or
Yes, we
okay, so
did.
we
We
met at
did.
the weather park bike party, and then we continued the conversation the next day. So it goes to show that networking is very important. And if you're not thinking about going to that happy hour, whether you drink or not, it does pay off. Okay, so thank you so
It
much.
really does. It really does.
If anybody had questions and wanted to reach out to you, how can they do that?
So email is great, LinkedIn as well. I'm trying to be active on Twitter. I mostly follow accounts. I don't post anything
Okay.
yet. I'm trying to gain the courage to do so. But yeah, always happy to meet new people and have interesting conversations.
That is so awesome. All of Ravit's information will be in the show notes or the job description or the description of the video or the podcast. Thank you again for stopping by, and then we'll talk to you very,
Thank you
very
for
soon.
having me.